and it is part 3 of 3 in the Molly Holschlag Show, 2006.
Does that mean I get extra money too, Jim?
We'll talk about that later. Is Rick Kovacek from City University in the house? Rick?
Oh my God.
This is yours! But wait, I just have to ask, even though it doesn't matter from a technical standpoint, do you have a Mac? Oh, you're styling. He has a Mac, and now, right answer. Pardon?
How big is it?
This is what, a 23? Yeah, yeah. At our Boston show, we're going to be doing a drawing for a big desk. So come on in December. Well, after that exciting moment, without any further ado, Molly, it's all yours again.
Thanks.
Molly Holschlag, everybody.
Thank you. Thanks, everybody. And thanks so much for sticking with me. For those of you who've been in the sessions I've been doing for the last couple of hours, we've covered some very, very interesting topics, a lot of technical stuff, a lot of how to get through the technical stuff to the design. And now we're going to spend some time, once I switch the computer over to the right screen, we're going to spend, is that it? No. What am I on, you guys? There we go. Yes? Okay, okay, there we go. I know that the last session had some problems, and this session would not exist if we didn't have the presentation materials, because we're going to do a lot of visual stuff now. So this is Transcending CSS, the fine art of web design. And essentially, we're going to look not at too much code, but we're going to look at visual design, some trends, ways of thinking, breaking out of boxes and grids, and a little look at what people are doing with CSS these days. Okay. This thing has been giving me trouble all day. So let's see. There we go. Whee! Don't you love Keynote? If only for the transitions. So one of the things from the title of this presentation that you might see as the fine art of web design is the idea, right, that we want to get past the technologies and into the art. Okay? Where is the artistry in our industry? So the transcending CSS concept is all about getting above the CSS. Now, does that mean not paying attention to it or not learning it? Of course not. It means knowing all those things, but it also means going a step beyond and not just looking at the technologies, but also looking at what we can and what we hope to be doing in terms of making the web a truly fine art. And I mean that visually, and in this case we'll be talking visually, but I also mean that in terms of the things that those of you who were with me in the last 2 sessions have heard about, the semantic markup, the content out process. Okay, this idea that minimalism in markup is wise, meaning, you code based on meaning, right? You don't, H1 is not big, bold, and ugly. It is the most important title. A paragraph is a paragraph. There is no such thing as P break break anymore. If you're still doing that, you should stop, because you don't have to. So the fine art of web design, the whole concept here is that we have to challenge the way we look at our work, the work that we are actually doing for the web, and challenging the way that we see our world. Okay? We need to look for sources of inspiration. I spoke a little bit of, you know, I have a friend, colleague, and I said to him, what do you do when you are looking for design ideas? And he said, I look at other websites. I think that that is a partial answer. It's not a good, solid answer. Because just looking at websites, as we'll see in this presentation, doesn't help us much, because they're dealing with the same limitations for the most part that all of us have been trying to overcome, right? So we want to go to look for other sources for inspiration, to break out of these very strange conventions that we've gotten ourselves into because of the technical limitations we've had. Designing with meaning and learning to look to the future. We've spent a lot of time retrofitting the past, trying to fix today, but as we have found out, and those of you who heard me joking about organic growth syndrome before, the reality is that our jobs are not going to get easier. They're going to continue to get more complex. And we are going to have more demands on us as we go along. And we really, really want to take a look at what's to come. Now, obviously, we don't all have crystal balls. Maybe some of you are psychic. But we don't have that ability to know what's going to happen. I mean, if you asked a year ago or 2 years ago about Web 2.0 and AJAX and how, what a great, uproarious, wonderful thing that would be, nobody would have guessed it. And as somebody quipped in one of my sessions before, I wonder why Web 2.0, or it took so long, because we've had this technology for several years now, okay? So looking to the future to anticipate progress and change. Because it's a little different audience than in the other room, I want to take a quick poll of the types of people that I'm talking to. How many people are visual designers working in visual tools such as Photoshop and related tools? Quite a lot of you. And how many people would consider themselves more in the coding, programmatic, technical side of things? Equally strong. How about people who like to walk both sides of the line and do, oh, I like that. Was it last year? It was a couple years ago at Web Design World. It was great. I think it was Web Design World. Or maybe it was South by Southwest. Jeffrey Zeldman was talking, and he said, he did a poll that was similar. He said, how many people consider themselves designers? How many people consider themselves technical people, content people, et cetera, et cetera? And then he said, how many people consider themselves web designers? So how many people consider themselves web designers? Now, see, I'd like to see everybody raise their hand, because if you're working on the web, whether you're doing content or technology or visual design or management, administration, sysadmin, whatever you're doing, you are part of web design, designing the web. So that's how I kind of look at it. So I just want to get a taste for who's in the room. So a nice balance. So there's a little story behind this. How many people are familiar with John Hicks by name? A few of you. Now, I'll tell you what he's known for, and you'll know him. The Firefox logo? How many people are not familiar with the Firefox logo? Okay, that logo was designed by an English designer named John Hicks. And Andy and I were in a store on Carnaby Street in London not too long ago, and we came across this particular shoe. And what's really funny is if you go to his website, this is his design. So it's very fascinating to me where people are getting their inspiration from. Who knew that from a design on a pair of Converse All-Stars, high tops, which I happen to love, there would be inspiration for somebody's site, right? Just take a look at Hicks' design, and you'll see that. So here, this is a representational image that I'm using throughout the presentation, because I'm asking you to look at your world for visual inspiration. We're bound by boxes, and here we're going to learn how to break out of them, at least conceptually. To teach you how to do this technically would take far more than the hour that I have. But we need to look at what the issues are. We have a couple of quotes here from Khoi Vinh, who you heard speak this morning. Art is design without compromise. So if you're trying to achieve great art, right, that means that there is no compromise for the artist. As designers, and most of us are in fact designers, because we have to make those compromises. You can't work with a team of people, you can't work for your audience without a compromise. And then Andy has a quote here. When we design for the web, we struggle against our materials, our environment, medium, and ourselves to create products that people love to use. Speaking to the fact that this isn't easy. How many people have had a real easy time in their career? Wow. You'd think one or two hands. Obviously, we're very challenged. And none of us would be here today if we didn't love that challenge, really. Either that or we're planning our exit strategy, right? But obviously, these challenges have not been easy because we're constantly being put upon to change the way we think, change the way we work, change the way we do something, learn a new technology, learn a new way of doing this or that. That's a lot of pressure. Not to mention all of the day-to-day stuff you have to deal with your administration and your business and running the day-to-day realities. Tough stuff. So we struggle against all of this. So the environment of the web is inflexible, it seems. It's two-dimensional, a solid screen, when we're looking just at that desktop. Or, as this gentleman will be looking at his nice new 23-inch Macintosh screen there. It's that, okay? It's limited for the purpose of this particular conversation, which is about visual design for the screen, okay? Not small screens, not alternative devices, but it's for the screen. That this is what we're dealing with. We have limitations. Markup does not give us all of the meaningful things that we need it. We have to sometimes kludge things together or think very creatively, as you'll see. There's poor support. We have that browser issue, right? How many people are, only designing to one browser currently? And that would be IE, right? Okay. So I'm glad only a couple of people raised their hands, because ideally we're not designing for one browser, but in many situations that's what we have to do. But ideally we are able to design in such a way, especially with CSS, that is able to encompass the issues of IE6 and the issues of browsers successfully. So it means more work, more understanding. You not only have to now understand how to, what application hierarchy, conflict resolution, and specificity algorithms are in CSS, but you also suddenly have to know every single browser, its quirks and bugs. That's a lot of information. So we've had a hard time, and I think that we have to unlearn what we have learned, and that this is going to be, to use a common word these days, an iterative process. We're going to have to learn and unlearn over and over and over again. This is a screenshot of a site by a guy named Owen Briggs, who is no longer on the scene. He was one of the early people who, he wrote a book for Glasshouse on CSS with some people, and he did a lot of interesting work early on the box model, okay, which is the model inside the web browser that helps display boxes, element boxes. He wrote about that, and he also did a lot of work on type. But if you look at this, you begin to see where we were thinking at the beginning of the rise of CSS design. So look at how minimalistic, okay, a square that's floated. 2 columns side by side centered in a screen space. 3 columns centered in a screen space. A header with 3 columns. Very, very limited. How much more do you see us doing today? Would you be shocked if I told you this is like 4 or 5 years ago? Okay, so this is really sort of a measurement point of what we had when we first began to emerge with CSS-based layouts. But unfortunately, we haven't gone beyond this box. We've been bound by these things. How many people remember this site? A few of you. This is a very famous site. It's very washed out in by this particular projector. But it's the layout reservoir by a guy named Rob Chandonese, who's no longer on the scene. I have no idea where he is. But he created some CSS and markup that you could just copy and paste. Okay? And 2-column layout, a 3-column layout, and a couple of varieties of those, different ways of approaching it. And this made making CSS-based sites very, very easy for a lot of people. But the problem is that it was very simple, just like those boxes we saw. And so everything we saw from there on in, boy, this is really washed out, isn't it? I apologize for that. It's the projector. Anyway, as you can see, everything is now still a box, right? I mean, it looks okay, but it's a box. So that was the Web Standards Awards, by the way. So for many years, here we are, struggling to promote CSS-based layouts over table-based layouts, and all we could come up with are some boxy designs. How many people remember this argument? I don't want to use CSS. Everything with CSS makes boxes, right? Everything's boxy. Well, of course, those of us that are here have seen the CSS Zen Garden, and we know better now, but we didn't know better then. Still, I challenge you, how many people are doing much more complex designs than a few columns, headers, and footers, right? So there are some people doing it. There are some. How many people are doing more complex grid-based layouts, deconstructed grids? Not much, okay? Because we don't know how. Or we haven't, the ways how have not been widely taught. So this is Cam Adams. Oh, by the way, somebody was asking about JavaScript and Ajax books. He's coming out, I think he just came out with a book from SitePoint, along with a guy named James Edwards, 2 very brilliant JavaScript guys from SitePoint. So their book, if you're trying to get started, is also a good place to look. We've arrived at a situation where beautiful sites with beautiful code are being produced by the hundreds every month, every week, every day. It's no longer a myth that you can produce a stunning website with web standards. Well, I think that's true. But I'm not so sure that people outside of our perhaps more intimate circle know that. Many people say, well, Molly, as group lead for the Web Standards project, don't you often feel like you're preaching to the choir? And yeah, after a while, it does become that. You've either bought the Kool-Aid or you haven't at this point. The problem is really now getting down to the hard work, right? How do we make it work? Now that we know we can, how? So we begin to see where these boxes emerge. But we do see attractive design that is being rendered all in CSS. PGA site. These images are so washed out, but this is actually a beautiful design. As you can see, there's great imagery, and we've got image replacement techniques going on here. Also, another attractive visual design. If we had only been doing these in tables, they would be very graphic heavy, and they're not. A lot of this is. So here we have, oh yeah, I love this one. Completely unusual design here with the darker colors. And of course, very famous a list apart. So these are all CSS-based designs, and you're seeing how very vastly different they are from each other, where here we have an emphasis on typography, like as if it were a print magazine, right? And this is really, it is an online magazine. So it looks very beautiful, the typography. This particular piece, I understand it took Eric Meyer and Jeffrey Zeldman and Jason Santa Maria something like 4 weeks to figure out how to get it placed properly. Okay, so if it takes those guys 4 weeks, okay. But you know what? They did it. And so now that they've done it, we have something to draw from. Okay, so we have things, we see things now happening with websites that are definitely moving along toward the place we want to be, where we see aspects of design, of the visual design coming through. But we still lack pizzazz, and we lack complexity. So in this section, I talk about breaking grids down, okay? And how many designers here are really into grids? Like, they love to study grids. Anybody? Yeah, because I'm very into grids, and I happen to see grids everywhere I look. And so when we think in grids, of course, what's a table? It's grid. And not only is it a grid, it's a very rigid grid. What happens with one column has to happen with everyone, unless you somehow limit it, right? So that has been part of this message, not only escaping the box of CSS, but escaping the box of that rigid grid system that we have. Mark Bolton, another UK designer that is doing wonderful work trying to push the grid and its variations. So grid design is a fundamental skill of any designer. Understanding proportional relationships, white space, and composition are all vital in constructing a grid for any delivery platform, web, print, and real 3D environments. So even though we're dealing with a screen, and even though we can have conversations about fixed versus fluid and all that, we have those conversations. The bottom line is that we are designing. So we need to look at some of the basic design principles and how they might or might not apply to that particular environment. So this is an interesting little picture. I was coming off the same train as these guys, and Andy got this snapshot. But what was so funny about it is not only does it speak to grids, but it speaks to the commonalities of features that we have within the grids. Every one of these guys has the same suit and tie. Pretty funny, huh? So there are grids everywhere you look, if you're looking at them. But also, conceptually, this is just a commentary. If we're that regimented, or we can be that regimented, obviously we've been expressing that on the web more. Here is what, essentially, a table-based layout would have given us. Now, the advantage of table-based, there are several advantages of table-based layouts. We often don't talk about that because the table-based layouts, our evil conversation is still going on. But there are actually advantages to table-based layouts. And one of them here, as we see, is that it creates a very specific grid, okay? And not only that, we can slice and dice we could conceivably, we don't want to do that anymore, but we could conceivably slice and dice our images to create any visual representation we want on those images. But we all know why that's difficult to do. We cause problems for usability, accessibility, maintainability, interoperability, and flexibility. All of those things that are so important to us get lost in this particular methodology. But there are some interesting things there. The other tool, I asked this at lunch, but I guess I phrased it wrong. What's the one true designer's tool for the web? Who said it? Say again? Photoshop? TextPad. Well, there's a holy war right there. Really, where is there, what tool can you use to create any design you want, with any typography you want, with any type of grid-based layout you want, with no limitation based on what you are doing visually? Flash. It's Flash. And of course, we all know that Flash is not always the appropriate tool for the job. But it is the true designer's tool because it didn't give us this limitation. We are still stuck. I was joking before how people say to me all the time, they say, oh, well, we're moving to div-based layouts. What they really mean to say is they're moving to CSS-based layouts. You can't replace a table cell with a div. That's not how it works. It's a completely different mindset. But getting there is taking some time, okay? Because this is what we worked with for so long. And now getting away from tables, can begin to break this, right? So we want to start breaking it up. Here is this is Subtraction. This is a wonderful website by Khoi Vinh, who is now with the New York Times. And look at the beautiful grid work here. Really, really attractive, all CSS-based. Usable, functional, and what I love about it, too, is look at the size of that image. It has great impact, and yet there's content there, too. Great navigation, very, very simple. Version 7 of his site says who he is. There's a search facility. Everything is here. Another grid-based design. And look at how colorful and different that is in CSS, right? Not necessarily limited to the way we would have done something in tables. How many people are familiar with Virla Peters? A few of you. She rocked the world this year when she basically created this web design on her personal blog because it has really started some trends that I'm going to show you some shots of in just a bit. But talk about some interesting features design-wise. Look at the shapes, okay? The rounded corners, of course, which, you know, I'm glad she's limiting her use of them because I'm getting real tired of seeing them. It really was. It was sort of the rounded corners was the answer to the boxiness, and now I'm getting really tired. How many people are really tired of rounded corners? Yeah, I think it's, you know, they could be nice. Like here, it's very nice. It's used subtly, right? So, you know, here's some things we need to be thinking about. But just her arrangement of information, you know, the way that she's got the 2 columns here and then a 3rd column that takes up a greater space. It's very interesting. So we begin to see how a 3-column can then begin to be broken down. So here's a very traditional layout, right, in CSS, and in anything, right? So you have a sidebar, a content area, right, a header area, and a footer area. Very common. But what happens if we start breaking that down, okay? We can get some interesting results. And think about the way we're seeing the space differently. All of this is possible with CSS, very easy, and would be much, much harder to do in table-based layouts. Okay, these are just floated element boxes. This could be a UL as a navigation bar, right? This could be also an unordered list or a paragraph. It doesn't have to be a div, right? These are just floated boxes. So you call them based on their function. Here, completely different. Look at all the boxes there. Still boxy, still grid, but completely breaking out of the expected. Even more and more. You know, so here are definitely different examples. How many people sit down when they're working for inspiration and sketch things out on a piece of paper? That's great to see so many hands go up because this is where you can do this stuff and really, really work the ideas and break out of the box, as it were. So here is a perfect example of what I was saying earlier about how Flash allows us to break out of the box without even thinking about it, okay? So this is the Superman website, Superman Returns. And notice how all of this is floating, and they have these different angles and things like that. This would be quite difficult to achieve in a table-based layout without having very heavy graphics. It's very achievable. I don't think there's anything you can't do in a table-based layout. I would be very surprised. The problems, we know the problems. The graphic weight would become quite intense here. So, but what we do see is that we have the opportunity to use space any way we want in an application like that. If you haven't seen this particular site for Corpse Bride, Oh my God, it is beautiful. Of course, anything Tim Burton, I'm fascinated with Tim Burton and related artistry, and Pirates of the Caribbean also. All of this is Flash. And we don't think about how we could do this maybe in CSS or markup, but it is completely possible. And you end up, this is not to say that Flash is bad. Use Flash for those pieces where you need the sound or the movie to work, but everything else can become background graphics, text, all of that. But the important point here in the relationship to the grids is that Flash has obviously allowed us not to think in grids. We're not thinking here in these linear boxes. We're thinking about the design, right? The whole artistry of that page. So we really want to start kind of looking at opportunities to do that. So here are a variety of designs and some others. Okay, so this was a year ago. Let me go back. My remote is acting a little, oops, sorry. A little moody remote here. There we go. Okay, so here's a bunch of designs that we saw about a year ago, okay? And then during CS Reboot this year, where a bunch of CSS designers decide to reboot their designs, what happened? What's with the return of black? I mean, look at this. Are we a world that is depressed or something? But this is a trend. These are trends that are very interesting to me. You see the dark, so light text on dark backgrounds, big trends right now. But look at the grid stuff. You do see some really nice broken up grids being worked on. I love this here too. But I have to tell you, I'm not so sure I could look at these sites for very long, right? So I'm concerned, gravely concerned. I'm excited about the grid stuff and the different layouts and all that, but I'm gravely concerned about this stuff. The dark background, light text, and there's another phenomenon that I don't think I have a slide for here. Does anybody guess, or anybody have any suggestions as to what other phenomena they're seeing regularly in design these days? Anybody? Something you're seeing? What? Gray on white, you're seeing that a lot. That's not too bad, I think, if the contrast is high enough. Like it's in, what? Gradient? Fonts are getting smaller. Actually, that's interesting. I think fonts used to be smaller. I think fonts are getting bigger. I would disagree with that. Especially Web 2.0 app stuff tends to be very big fonts, and I love that because my eyes are aging and I'm getting to that point where I'm looking at the pill jar like my mother used to, like this, you know. Very upsetting. But anyway, let me back up as you're seeing these images. Hold on here. Okay, so what I wanted to show you here, okay, so the thing that I wanted to talk about before I go on to the next section, not only are we seeing this particular trend, we're seeing this. Because of the resolution on this particular monitor and the screen, it's very poor, but I'll just do your best to bear with me. What's going on here? Horizontals. You see all the horizontals being used? Not so much in here, we see more vertical, but in these three especially, you can see how much emphasis, this one over here, a lot of horizontal sections being used, something we have really not seen yet. So out of these designs, I'm starting to like that. I'm starting to like the fact that information is not only being placed, visually speaking, you know, in a column. It's also being thought of now as horizontal, so that's a really good thing. And goes back to the issue of grids and how we begin to see them. And of course, all of this is CSS-based, so you turn off the CSS and you have semantic markup underneath with your content. Most of the images are coming through the backgrounds in CSS, or they're images that are functional and therefore are in line. But these sites all are CSS-based layouts. Okay? So now we started to look at inspiration for grids. And one of the places we found a lot of inspiration for grids was in worldwide newspapers. This is why I'm saying get out of the idea that everything is going to be on the web. It's not. Good web design is going to be found outside. Look at that. I mean, look at the grid systems here that we're seeing. Very different when you look at something in a different language. And this one is the most interesting to me of all, is Japanese. Look at, we have Japanese being read from top to bottom, from, what is it, it's right to left. We have different areas. I mean, talk about a complex grid, huh? So What about that? Doable? You bet. Okay? The only time, the only caveat about doing something of this nature that would be problematic, okay, and perhaps not possible in certain situations for CSS is if you have a very heavily dynamic-driven website where the content length changes dramatically. Unless you overflow things and allow for a scroll bar to occur, one day, if you know the content is going, if it's less than this, you know how boxes in CSS work, right? Whether they're floated or positioned, they're always going to go to their content width unless you modify anything in the box model, right? So it's not like tables when the longest cell brought all the other cells down, okay? That's one benefit we had with tables that was really cool. And sometimes people will still use a very simple table just to get that general structure and then style it within there. It's an option. Not one that I heartily recommend, but as long as you linearize your content and check it for accessibility issues, I think you'll be okay. But this is the point. The point is that we need to not look at the web anymore for our inspirational sources. We need to get back out into other media. One thing I'm sure you've noticed, something that I've seen a great deal of, is when I'm like watching television, how much the web has affected design for TV. Has anybody noticed that? Yeah, people have seen this. So now I'm saying, okay, the web has influenced the way we design other things. Let's start looking at those other things and bring them back to the web. Because we used to say, well, print designers, the web is not print. All that's true. The web is not print. But that doesn't mean that there are fascinating and important lessons to be learned from print or from other media, right? So look at the newspapers. They're a perfect example of how to look for grids or ideas that, where else would you find that inspiration? You're definitely not going to find this on a website that easily these days, built in CSS, okay? But it's very doable. And of course, with CSS, these are just element boxes based on the content that we put inside of them. So magazines, right? I always like to look at magazines and wonder how I would mark things up. So an exercise that I highly recommend for people who like to do some creative warm-ups before they start doing their prototypes and things like that, sit down with a magazine or make a mood board. I like to do that sort of thing too. But if you're doing the markup or you have a coworker that's doing it, right? Show some of your initial ideas like this, build a mood board, bring your coworker, if you don't understand the XHTML and CSS part yourself, bring the person in that can, and start looking at what these things are. What's this? What is that in markup? How would I mark that up? Anybody? It's a list. It's an ordered list. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And I can take a UL and LI, right? And I can make those columns by floating those LIs, right? Give them an explicit width, put a background image in them, and get that exact result with an unordered, or in this case, an ordered list. That's it, okay? So this is how to think through design into code. It's not easy at first. And if it's not coming naturally to you right away, which I noticed it didn't, well, I don't know, not everybody spoke up. Not everybody spoke up. But it's pretty funny. It's funny and it's not funny to look at the fact that this is obviously a list, but we don't make the connection in our heads. And that's the connection, exactly the connection we have to start making in order to get design, CSS, and good markup working in tandem, right? And scripting plays a big role in that as well, because then with those things firmly in place, the scripters can really see where they could do advantageous and fun things with what you've got. What about this? What would you mark this up as? This bottom one right here, I don't know if everybody can see that. I wish we had had a second. So it's basically got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 images and a grid between them, separating them. Any takers? An unordered list? Absolutely. You could absolutely do that as an unordered list. The other option would possibly be a table, okay? Don't rule out tables. They are not evil inherently, okay, if the data is tabular, all right? So this may well be tabular data. We have to look at what it is, okay? So as you can see, this is sort of the way that I like to work, and to start out with, you know, getting some ideas from whatever sources I'm doing, and then figure out what those things are in markup, and then begin creating little modules of interface components. And that's how you get really able to do things that are a little more out of the ordinary. This can be marked up in CSS. No problem, okay? Excuse me, this can be designed in CSS, laid out in CSS, marked up in semantic markup. What is this? It's an H1, okay, or possibly an H2 if there's something else going on there. But I would say this is an H1, and this is an H2. So earlier, I was talking about how H1 doesn't mean big, bold, and ugly anymore. That's why. Look at that. Look at this. This is beautiful, purplish pink, and much larger than the H1, because we don't rely on the markup to make the result. The CSS is doing that, and we can change it to any size we want. But you take the CSS away, and you've got a header 1 that says March is the month 2, and then header level 2, go natural. And that's how your screen readers are going to read it, and that's how you can deliver plain content to those browsers that can't support CSS. They get the content, very easy to navigate, very easy to use, but they just don't get the pretty stuff. Pretty cool. So this is the encouragement here, is to start thinking in terms of okay, here's the design, what's the markup, okay? And building, you know, sketching out grids, that this would be a general deconstructed grid of what we just saw. Grids are everywhere. I'm looking down this aisle and I see a grid right there. I see a whole bunch of floated columns, and then there's another div, which I had to use in order to get that border and float the columns there. Okay? I mean, everywhere you look, think about it. Think of the visuals that you see the ceiling, okay? Now, that's probably, depending on the data, it could be a table, right? I don't know. We have to think about it. Look at your world. You laugh. I mean, over lunch, I said to the people at the table, I said, now I'm going to ask you to define the markup and style for your plate. What's on your plate? And they looked at me like I was nuts. But this is the kind of thing, which may be true, but that's sorry. But the reality is that the encouragement here is to get you looking at other stuff. Look at your world, because it has answers that we don't necessarily have in terms of just taking a look at the time here. We go to 5:30, correct? Yes, okay, good. So we have all of these amazing grids in our world. Look at this. I mean, think about it. Suddenly, you can be inspired by that. Draw it out. Try it out. How do you do it, right? Okay, how about adding some shape and unusual ideas? This is in the world, the reflection. Come on. Here we've taken a bunch of grids and put them on their side to get a very interesting look and feel. All of this is easily, when you know how to do it, marked up. Look at this. We've now got a grid with circles. Look at that. Look at that. You can turn that into a web design. Okay? This is the point, that everything you see can be made into a visual design. And this is how we're going to get out of this very boxy ideology, very grid and linear ideology, into something that's far more organic. Okay? So markup in the real world. Now that I've already done some markup, guess the markup games, we're going to play some more. Markup that is not only technically valid, this is important. You want to try for validity. For those of you doing markup that are, how many people are struggling with like CMSs and ad servers? Some of you, yeah. A lot of times you have external issues that really can mess with validation, and in those cases, I would say that you're probably okay. You have to deal with what realities you're dealing with. But wherever you can, validation is always good. Certainly good as a benchmark. Correct what you can, what you can't, you have to leave. So let's take a look at some examples in the real world. Okay. So we start with a canvas, and we build out a basic layout like you've seen before. Now, how would you mark this picture up? Any takers? Give it some thought. Okay? This is the result we want to display on the page, but we want to express it as if it were code. Not worrying about the style, because the style is there. Worrying about the code. Okay? So the markup itself. What is this? A three-column layout. It's a unordered list. Both are correct because it can be an unordered list and then you float the list items to get a three-column layout. But the real answer is it's a list. You might have recognized a little theme going on here. Lists are, of course, our very, very, very favorite thing to work with because they are so useful and logical. When we take away the style, we still have a logic behind it. Why is this a list? This is a race. Each runner has a number. Each runner is in a position. So what kind of a list is it? It's an ordered list, right? It's not an unordered list. It's an ordered list because of the position. Now, it will change dynamically, right, as the race goes on. But at some point, we're listing the runners in order of their position of the race. And then we're going to link to their runner number and to their profile. And so what we end up with is this. That's it. And then everything else can be brought in through imagery, okay? But we could have some information around this that says, you know, here's the latest status in the race. Here's how people are doing. You have a list that's there, but you see the visuals. And you can click anywhere on those visuals to get the information. What about this? A line of taxi cabs. Take a guess. Wild guess. Unordered list. Okay, so if we have taxi cabs and we're going to order them by position in the rank and the taxi number, we do, in fact, have an ordered list. But what happens if we have all this information? We have taxi cabs in order by position, the taxi number, a driver name, and a license plate. What do we do then? Database. That's a good answer, but it's very good. But yes, actually, if you'll pardon the multiple puns in this statement, the database guess is a good one because it is linked to the information that we're delivering to a table. Bingo. Not just any old table, though, but a properly structured table using table rows and table headers appropriately. Okay? So not just random TDs like we used to do. We are understanding that TH does not mean make this bold. I used to remember doing this. Okay, how many people did this? Oh, the crimes against markup I can confess to. TD, B, word, close B, close TD. That's all presentational. TH, the fact that it's bold, is purely dependent on the browser style. That is not at all anything that should be looked at as, I mean, you can rely on that if you want to, because you know the browser will style it that way, and most browsers do. Almost all browsers that I'm aware of will style a TH as bold, okay? But if you want to have control over that, you still have to style it, because you can style it any way you want, right? So there you go. So again, this relationship, trying to encourage you know, whether you're a visual person or not, looking at the world around you and determining how to make it make sense in the technology and vice versa. This is the gap we haven't filled yet that we're working so hard to fill. How do we take these great design ideas and concepts and principles that we know work and marry them to the markup and CSS that we also know help us in so many ways and make something beautiful with it? That is the point. My favorite city in the world, San Francisco. Seattle is a second, I wouldn't say second, but it's definitely up there. Beautiful city here. But San Francisco, how would you mark up San Francisco? Well, if a street has buildings, streets are ordered. So we could use an ordered list. Each building probably should have an address. So I've added a span with a class of ADDR. So here's my unordered list and my list items. And I have a nested unordered list in which I actually go for the specific building. So my unordered list is my list of the different buildings. Does anybody know what they're looking at? What that code all comes together to be? Any takers? Anybody in my first session today? It's an address, not semantically. Notice the span and the ontology. This is microformats. This is the H card microformat. Okay? Now, if I set that up on my site, right, I could conceivably then create a link where I click it, and provided I've got everything in place to make it work, that automatically downloads into my address book. That is a microformat. Microformats are using existing markup to extend the functionality of what we're doing. So not only have I looked at the way we can mark up a particular building in the city of San Francisco, but we've also uniquely identified it and given it all these parameters. And we now have to figure out a good way to design that. How do we design that? How do we make that look pretty on the page? That's up to us, or the visual designers among us, to make it happen, okay? So if you haven't read about microformats, microformats.org. Yes, there's a question in the back. Pardon? Because I'm assuming that the ordered list is that either that neighborhood or that street, okay? So the upper list would be the street, and then the nest within it would be the individual building in this case. See how I would do that? Yeah, you could, or you could do, I mean, there's a couple of different ways you could think about it. It may become a table. It just depends what kind of information you have. But this is the type of thought process I would really like to encourage, particularly visual designers, but also people who are not necessarily visual. Because, again, the whole idea is bridging this gap between those worlds. What is possible with one thing and possible with another will never be fully at our disposal, either as developers or as designers or as content people or whatever our role as a web designer is, unless we begin to get this cross-thinking going, looking at an image and understanding how maybe we would mark it up, right? This is a good exercise to do. And those mood boards and looking at outside, gotta look at this stuff. So, and, you know, something I've been advocating for many, many years, and in fact wrote a book about integrated web design long before people were talking about this. And now I look back at that book and I think, wow, it's amazing. I had the right idea. I just didn't have it. It wasn't mature enough yet. I had to go through all these other lessons first. And a lot of that had to do with learning CSS. We get to this issue of progressive enhancement. Okay, how many people are familiar with that terminology? Many of the CSS Zen Garden sites, for example, or pages, designs, are, for example, quite different if you look at them in IE6 versus Netscape Mozilla. Or something of that, you know, Opera Safari Mozilla. Every site that's official, excuse me, every design on the CSS Zen Garden that is official has to comply with the regulation that it be able to work in IE6. There is no stipulation that says that it has to look the same as what gets delivered to another browser. So what we were doing, and what we still do, if you look at many of the designs on the Zen Garden site, they are progressively enhanced. Progressive enhancement presents a viable approach by enabling the delivery of information as demanded by the users while embracing accessibility, future compatibility, and determining user experience based on the capabilities of new devices. Okay, so this basically says progressive enhancement is all about doing today what might not always work in a browser but is hidden successfully from those browsers that don't support it, while continuing to progressively enhance for those browsers that do support it. And the way that we do this is by using implementation that doesn't exist in IE6. Okay? which now people go, well, what happens when IE7 comes out? Well, guess what? What happens when IE7 comes out is that IE7 will now take on all those styles and give you the result that you're getting in the progressively enhanced version. So this means this is truly about preparing for the future today while giving your Mozilla, Opera, Safari, compatible browsers, compatible with contemporary CSS browsers, the best experience, and IE, a good experience, and one that those users will probably not even realize that something is missing until they load IE7 and see their site and think you did a whole bunch of work that they didn't pay you for. We like that. It's like, you'll get that phone call. My site, there's like this really cool stuff on it. How did it get there? Like, when I hover over that, it highlights, and how'd that happen? Oh, we have this new technology. I don't know, you can make up some story, but you can see how that can work in your favor. So Dave Shea wrote about something called MoS Enhancement. That's what he calls it. Same type of concept, but very specific to browsers. And what he's done here is that he says the key to the MoS method is somewhat similar to how Netscape 4 pages designed as CSS became more prevalent. After creating a basic functioning page in IE, you add extra functionality with these selectors. Again, choosing the selector types that IE does not understand, okay, or elements within, like in the Netscape 4 days, what we would do, and believe me, those days are not over if you work in government at all. I just came back from an agency in DC where Netscape 4 is a platform they still have to support because they spent millions of dollars to develop highly secure web apps on them. They're not going to go break it all down. The money just isn't there. And they're functioning and they work, so why upgrade the browser? So this, this still exists. But what we would do was the add import trick. Many of you might be familiar with that, where you imported your style into your Netscape, you import your style into your markup so that if Netscape 4 hits that page, it doesn't understand the add import at rule. If it doesn't understand something, what does a browser do with it? It ignores it. For now, as long as we're sending it as text/HTML, which is a whole other story. But so this is really how we've been doing this. And there are an example in the CSS Zen Garden that I would love to point you to is called gemination. The reason that this is a great example is because if you open it up first in like Firefox or Safari or Opera, okay, or Camino or anything like that, and then go open it in IE6, and you're going to be in for quite a surprise because out of the same style sheet, and I would do this except I can't demo it on my Mac without using Virtual PC, which is really slow. But anyway, what you will see are two completely different designs. Completely different designs. A completely progressively enhanced version being sent to all of the Mozilla Opera and Safari browsers, and a completely different design sent to IE out of the same style sheet, never having touched that markup, which of course is one of the first rules of the CSS Zen Garden. You never touch the markup. How did they do that? Well, what they did is they put all the rules that IE understands, right, at the top of their CSS. They used what is known as a signature, okay? HTML signature, also some people call it body classing, where you either put an ID or a class either in your HTML or body element. Some people prefer HTML, some people prefer body, whatever the arguments are. Bottom line is you're identifying that page as being unique using an attribute selector. Okay, so attribute selectors do not exist in IE6. They do in IE7. All right, but in IE6 they're not there. So then by classing the body, or I think it's ID, I forget on the Zen Garden what the markup is. By doing that, then underneath all of the styles that IE understands, you put the attribute selector with the name of the ID or class in it. So an attribute selector, obviously, by its name, selects by attribute. So take any anchor with an href and give it this style, okay, as opposed to by element, right, which we're accustomed to by element. Now we actually are going to have the power to do it by attribute. So any body that has a class of page gets this style. What you've done is you've done a couple of things there. You've sent a whole different design by creating rules with that structure to the browsers that can read those rules. And all of the Mozilla Opera and Safari browsers can. And IE gets a different design sent to it out of the same style sheet with no JavaScript, no other magic going on, simply by intelligent use. Because the rules at the bottom, right, are in the cascade in a stronger position, and because they are very much higher in specificity, because they are more complex selectors, when IE7 fixes its stuff, and we've already tested this out, we went and we did gemination in IE7 with the Microsoft guys, and it works. They get the stuff. IE7 will now pick up the stuff that has only been from Mozilla Opera and Safari. So you're actually coding in a way that is anticipating change. Are there problems with that? Not if they're implementation issues. If you're using bug-related hacks, yes. But if you're using implementation, as soon as something is implemented, then it will go in. It will be picked up. Now, if it conflicts with something, that's where you have to be thoughtful. But progressive enhancement is a really important part of this transcendent concept. So we don't necessarily, it also puts us in a position to learn more about CSS right now, because we need, obviously, all to learn more about CSS. And to begin understanding not just our descendant selectors and our other selectors that we are so accustomed to using, but going into attribute selectors and child selectors and adjacent sibling selectors, right? So all of that stuff is going to be in IE7. It's all there. We need to make use of it. So Transcendent CSS makes full use not only of all of this, the most up-to-date CSS techniques. In doing so, it does not require that we limit our creativity to the limited capabilities of legacy browsers. This is the message, okay, in this section of the conversation. The message is we don't want to be forever carrying the weight of those legacy browsers around. However, we still have to send them something. We always will, right? So do graded browser support. Nate Ketchley, K-O-E-C-H-L-E-Y. Look on Google for graded browser support, and you will find plenty of links to an article that he did for Yahoo that's been circulated all over the place. And they're actually circulating him now to go talk about it. And if you get a chance to see him speak on this, it's very, very powerful because he talks about how to grade browsers. In other words, determine, okay, on this tier of browsers, you know, that all support this, they get this content and this style. And all browsers that have this much support, they're graded a B, and they get this content and this style, okay? And then on down to something like, let's say, Netscape 4 or some of the Mac IE and things like that. These get they get only content, no style, right? So there are actual browser grades and matrices and all these things that you can do that will really help you make better decisions about looking forward while ensuring that you're keeping the door open for everybody who came before. So Transcendent CSS makes full use of all CSS 2.1 properties and, oh yes, alpha transparencies in PNGs for IE7. So attribute selectors, here's an example. I don't know if everybody can see it because of the washout here, but this is an anchor element, so an A, and then you have a regular square bracket with the attribute of title. This particular construct, if you're unfamiliar with it in CSS, means select any anchor with an attribute of title and then style it the way I tell it, okay? Really powerful, all right? And if we have generated content, which is the before and after pseudo elements in CSS, which we will not have in IE7 and probably won't have in IE8, this is another holy war argument that doesn't seem to be resolvable at this point in history. Generated content is the idea that you can use CSS to generate content onto the page. So by saying, if I did something like a title colon before, I could, or after, let's use after, I could actually create the opportunity in every other browser than IE that is contemporary to generate the URL's value right next to the URL. How does that help us? Well, if we've got a print style sheet on this, it helps us a lot because what value is a link on a page? Printed page? None at all. But by having something like that, suddenly we're empowered to have that go to our print style sheet. And so automatically prints out. This will work in Mozilla Opera and Safari, and with a little bit of JavaScript, it will work in IE6 right now. We also look at child selectors, okay? We didn't have those before. This is a child selector. This says only the children, the immediate children, not all the descendants of this paragraph, only its immediate children, right? So to make it easy, if I were talking about the HTML element, and I would select children, there would only be 2 children I could select, wouldn't there? Right? There would be what? Body and head. Very good. So every child of that element, which is also why it's really important to look at your document trees and understand your inheritance and your relationships and all of that. Once it's visualized, especially for visual thinkers, it's better. It's hard to do it in abstract. We have something called the adjacent sibling selectors. H2, the combinator here is the plus sign. That is the technical term, by the way, for these symbols, combinators, like in mathematics. So H2 plus P means, and I like to read my selectors from the inside out, because that way I understand it more logically, because especially when they're really complicated. But this means a paragraph that is immediately adjacent next to an H2 will get this style. Yes? So are there any parent? You know, I have heard this question come up from people a lot, and no, there aren't, and there's no plan in CSS3 whatsoever. But I tell you, it's been heard enough that I think we'll take it to the W3C next time the CSS group meets, because that is something that really needs to be talked about. I could really see the value of it. I see the value of this. And that's not, you know, if you've got this, it shouldn't be too hard to then implement. Okay, so really interesting stuff that's there and that we should be breaking into and tapping into. So Transcendent CSS, this whole concept, means that we should avoid all hacks and filters like I was talking about earlier, wherever possible, and only use those hacks that are valid to target browsers that are no longer being developed or supported. Okay. The other thing I didn't get to mention, we were talking about hacks in the last class and got close to time. But one of the things I didn't mention were Microsoft's conditional comments as an alternative to hacking. It's a controversial approach. I don't have a personal opinion on it. I think if it's arguable, if it's the best choice for your situation, I have no problems with it. Basically, they're just comments that go into your HTML. But the reason that they're controversial is because they're only for Microsoft, and they also go into your HTML. So in other words, I can use them and say, if Microsoft IE5 is seeing this page, then it should go read this CSS file. If Microsoft IE55, whatever, so like that. So conditional comments can be very useful, but they, again, are controversial because of the proprietary and unilateral perspective that they have, but it's an option. My opinion, I'd rather use, I'm a little bit in the dissenting voice because we had this conversation at Web Standards Project where there's some very, very smart people, a hell of a lot smarter than I've ever been, and everybody just, most people felt that hacks, valid hacks were better than conditional comments. And I thought that the conditional comments were better than the hacks because you still have to clean up the hacks. You're always going to have to clean up a hack. So more about Transcendent CSS, looking to the future, using these techniques, just like we said. But right now also looking at CSS3 because there's some fascinating stuff going on in there. There's multi-column flow layouts so that you can take a text and make it flow across columns dynamically. Beautiful. We've been needing this stuff for a long time. But there's a lot of stuff that isn't in there either. And it's up to us to begin asking for it. Believe it or not, the W3C is not an isolated, it likes to think it is, but it's not an isolated organization. And there are enough of us out here that want to bring information back and say, look, this is what the developer and designer community are saying to you. Let's take a look at it. We want a parent selector. It will help designers. Right? We want multi-flow columns. It will help me do my job. So text shadow, beautiful property. Safari has support for it. If you've ever used it, you can actually create drop shadows right there using CSS, never having to touch an image. It's beautiful. Yes? An XPath type approach to selectors with CSS. I honestly don't know how to answer that. Is anybody familiar with XPath and how that's working? You know, it's really interesting because the silos of the W3C very rarely talk to each other, and when they do, it's usually a fist fight. But to the best of my knowledge, I don't think anything like that is being done. So just to finally wrap up, and I will graded browser support, which I already covered. You see that here. And this, by the way, is Andy Clark's site in IE7. If you look at it in IE6, you will see something completely different. So this basically proved the moment. Again, the colors are pretty crappy. I apologize for that. But this proved the moment that IE7 is now functioning like a browser, like its cousins that are now more mature. Okay? So without further ado, I think I will open up for questions and comments. And it's 5:30, so if you want to leave, feel free. If you have questions, there's a lot we discussed today. I will stay and be happy to answer your questions, okay? So why don't you, if you're going to, thank you very much. It's been an excellent audience. A true pleasure to be with you here today. So come on up if you want to have a conversation or have questions.